The Zarlum Chronicles, Episode 2, Part 2. As everything was going so well for the planet, it could only get a lot better. But then it didn't. The gravity being formed around the planet was getting stronger and stronger and was beginning to affect the rest of the galaxy, pulling and pushing around rocks. Some of them flew towards the planet. However, the moon's gravity was able to push them away again. Even if they didn't, it was likely the meteors would just hit into the moons. However, one small and seemingly unimportant meteor broke through the moon's security guards flying towards the planet. It flew down through the atmosphere, being watched by the creatures as it flew towards the ocean. Luckily, it wasn't a big meteor. It was only the size of a large car. It didn't look very useful or important. It just looked like a rock. The meteor crashed into the ocean, not causing any damage to anything. It didn't even kill any fish. It just began to sink to the bottom of the water. What the creatures didn't realize was it was the most important meteor that would ever hit the surface of Zarlum. The meteor carried tiny microbacteria. 1 multiplied into 2, then 4, then 8, and continued forever expanding until there were millions upon millions of them floating through the water. They were also absorbing into each other to become even bigger. After a few million years of absorbing into each other, they were tadpole-like creatures swimming with tiny little flippers, being about an inch long, eating just the algae in the water. They would remain like that for a few 100 million years, just existing, awaiting their moment to evolve any further. For now, they liked it in the water and didn't see any reason to leave. While they were slowly evolving, the giant bugs had sadly died. However, in death, life could rise. With the former kings of the planet being dead, new creatures decided to take on the mantle. Many tried. However, none were as successful as the lizards, which realized they couldn't survive being small lizards and living in the lakes and ponds. So they came out the water and began to evolve bigger, until they became the mighty dinosaurs that ruled over the world for millions of years. Because there wasn't a lot anyone could do about it. Because, they're dinosaurs. What is anything going to do about it? The dinosaurs evolved in multiple different directions. Some became enormous plant-eating dinosaurs that even the biggest of predators couldn't take down. Some took to the sky. Others decided to become enormous predators, keeping all the smaller dinosaur numbers down with fear from them being unstoppable. However, some of them went back to the water, becoming enormous creatures, ruling over the planet. That became a rather large problem for the tadpole-like creatures, because they were living in the water with ease. However, with the new creatures swimming around, they were just treated as dinner, which wasn't exactly ideal. They eventually decided that the water wasn't so fun anymore. It was almost like they had started their life on beginner's tutorial, and now they were in the real game, so they had no other choice than to begin evolving over millions and millions of years to grow in size and grow some bigger legs, going from 2 to 4 legs. However, that didn't really fix their issues, because going from land to water wasn't in any way an easy process. They had to start learning to hide in areas underwater. They did have to go on land a few times every year to lay their eggs like turtles, then return to the ocean where they were just constantly eaten and bullied by everything else because they were an easy target. It's interesting how a creature being constantly eaten and bullied and seemingly having no chance of survival would someday evolve to become one of the strongest and smartest creatures on the entire planet. They just didn't know it yet. All they had to do was crawl out of the slime and take their world. If that's how you want to imagine, it would just take a very long time. But they were patient and somehow knew they were destined for greatness, so they just had to wait and evolve. After a few million years of evolution, the small lizard-like creatures' evolution and patience had finally paid off because they had upgraded their skill tree from coming out the water to lay some eggs to fully coming out the water forever. They weren't exactly the most remarkable of creatures, only being lizards moving slowly on 4 legs. However, them being small was actually a good thing. The creatures in the ocean only picked on them because they were small, and in the ocean, it was easy to catch them. But on the land, the dinosaurs just didn't really care about them, despite that they were only the size of small cats and didn't have any way to defend themselves at all. So they lived deep in burrows and caves, hidden from the dinosaur threat that ruled over the planet. The creatures had made the leap from sea to land, but the dinosaurs were an issue for them. Luckily, nature had everything covered, but that didn't mean it was going to be made any easier for them. Because why would nature want it to be easy after a few million years of survival? The lizard creatures were finding it extremely challenging to stay alive. They were constantly being hit by freezing and harsh winters, like explosions of cold air, making it impossible to hunt and keep their children alive. To combat that annoying little problem, they ditched their scales and replaced them with thick hairs, becoming the first small rat-like creatures with extremely long noses to smell deep under the ground, detecting food such as bugs like a metal detector. The nose also helped to fish the bugs out the ground. Across the planet, multiple creatures were doing the same, and in the far future, they would split and diversify into multiple different species. They all still stood on 4 legs, running around like small rodents, hiding away from the monsters on the surface. It was extremely difficult to evolve any bigger than rats because of the dinosaurs always finding and killing them. The biggest became about the size of badgers, but even they were hunted down constantly.
They all had to live deep in caves, feeding on bugs that descended into the caves. Or they could live high in the trees, feeding on nuts and berries. One of the tiny zerms started looking at its young, cleaning them with its long pink tongue, while they moved around because of the roughness of the tongue. But its mother knew best. It needed a bath. It realized it would need to find some food for them because they were running low. However, it was terrified. It would have to venture out of its cave. Despite the fear, it knew it was for its children. So it proceeded anyway. It slowly poked its head outside the cave, looking out and listening very carefully for any sounds at all. Having not detected anything, it jumped out the cave. Its back legs were designed better for hopping across the ground extremely quickly, like a tiny kangaroo. After hopping over trees and rocks, it finally came across an anthill, full of ants running around, grabbing leaves and sticks, attempting to cover and protect their hill from predators. However, considering one of the predators was standing staring at them, it was clearly ineffective. The zerm kicked the sticks out the way, beginning to use its long pink tongue to grab the ants from the hill, storing them in its cheeks. Its saliva was drowning them. However, it still felt weird feeling the many wriggling legs against its cheeks. It was also eating some for itself while storing them. Suddenly, it heard a screech from its right, turning to see a small dinosaur looking through the trees at it. They both paused for a second, seemingly sizing each other up. The zerm frozen in fear. The dinosaur moved forward slightly, snapping the zerm out of its fear stance. It turned, sprinting away. However, the green and red dinosaur immediately leaped forward. It was a lot bigger, so it was able to easily leap over the sticks and leaves. It took only 3 seconds for it to clamp its thin jaws around the zerm's throat, crushing it with its long, white, sharp teeth. The zerm tried to escape. However, the dinosaur snapped its jaws down harder, hearing the loud snap, then pop, as it instantly died, its body falling limp. The dinosaurs picked up its prize, looking around to make sure nothing was around, then stomped off, meaning the children of the zerm were going to die, and there was nothing they could do about it. However horribly, that was nature. One of the greatest illusions on Zarlum is continuity. The continuity of the mighty dinosaurs had been going on for almost 265 million years.
and it didn't seem as though anything could possibly go wrong, or even change any time at any point. Then Zarlum got bored, and well, that was dangerous. The world of Zarlum was a warm, pleasant land, mostly covered with lush, beautiful forests and an incredible diversity of trees, flowers, ferns, and millions of little critters scampering all over the surface. The dinosaurs were enormously ubiquitous and had diversified into hundreds of species, all shapes and sizes, able to evolve to live in any climate, cold, hot, in the air, or under the ocean. There didn't seem to be a single place on Zarlum they hadn't invaded. The giant titanosaurs, large and gentle giants, sharing the world with beasts like the mighty T-Rex which ruled over the land. Pectinodon hunted in the undergrowth, while Edmontosaurus wandered the many coastlines and swamps of the world, going from one beautiful place to another for their long winter migration. The world was an ancient, beautiful paradise, full of life. 265 million years after the dinosaurs came out the ocean and had decided Zarlum would be their home. Maybe on a random Friday afternoon, life was the same as it ever had been for our massive dinosaur friends, until everything wasn't normal at all. When things are going good on Zarlum, it got bored and decided to shake things up, like God was playing a Sims game and wondering, I wonder what would happen if I just let the Sims die in horrible ways. Don't deny you haven't at least killed one of your Sims characters on purpose at least once. We've all done it. I hope so, or otherwise I'm some kind of insane person. And considering what I'm about to do, there may be some evidence to support that conclusion. That was why the continuity needs some serious work on Zarlum. The dinosaurs were perfectly happy until a tiny, tiny detail in the night sky changed all of that and decided their fate for the rest of their lives forever. And it wasn't going to be very tiny for very much longer. They just didn't know it yet. Even if they did, there was nothing they could do about it. On that perfectly ordinary Friday afternoon, a small triceratops had wandered from the rest of the herd. It was young and believed its skills at defending itself were higher than it actually was. As it ate, it heard the slight snapping of a twig from a large collection of bushes and trees. If it had been more experienced, it would have realized the true danger of the situation. However, it slowly walked over, curious, having no idea how much danger it was really in. Suddenly, an enormously powerful jaw burst from the bushes, tearing them apart, spreading sticks and leaves everywhere as the rest of the body of the fierce monster followed. Before the Triceratops could react, the overpowered T-Rex dug its razor-sharp teeth into its throat. The blood dripped down its throat. The T-Rex used one of its large feet to hold the Triceratops down. It tried desperately to escape. However, it was nowhere near strong enough. The Triceratops fell dead. So the T-Rex let go, having no need to hold it anymore. The rest of the herd came round the side of the trees, looking angry. They charged forward, however, realized it was pointless to try and fight the T-Rex. There was no saving the youngster. The T-Rex roared at the top of its lungs, making the rest of the herd run away into the forest, scared and saddened by the death of the youngster. The T-Rex began to eat from its catch, enjoying its food, and basking in the view of the sun setting over its mighty kingdom. It looked down to the large river, seeing crocodiles watching from in the water, waiting for the perfect time to strike at a meal it wouldn't ever have. Other creatures were also waiting in the forest, watching from the tree line. The T-Rex had had its fill, so decided to let the cleanup crew do its thing. It walked away as the scavengers arrived. The T-Rex walked across its kingdom, finally arriving at its home, a large cliff overlooking the forest below. The T-Rex got itself ready for sleep.
It was about to go to sleep when it looked up to the stars like it did every night before. However, for the first time, it noticed the appearance of what looked like a new star burning away in the sky, slightly bigger than the others. A tiny dot sparkling away in the sky.
That wasn't uncommon to see new stars forming in the sky, so the T-Rex planted its head down on the ground, closing its large orange eyes, going to sleep like normal. It couldn't possibly have known that the star was not a star at all. It was something so much more dangerous than that. An enormous, destructive dot in the sky, ready to rip away its kingdom. Over the coming weeks, the star slowly grew in size, getting bigger and brighter as it approached. It began to be joined by meteor showers, which were beautiful to look at. However, they were just the foot soldiers, like marbles compared to the cannonball that was descending on the world, getting faster and faster. One day, the T-Rex was standing on its cliff, performing a strange cry over the trees, causing birds to fly from their nests. The T-Rex was doing this because it had become the mating season, and it was calling out over the world for a male. Meanwhile, a few miles away, a male had finally been called over by the female. However, it was hungry. That was when it noticed a large area full of dead animals. It almost seemed too good to be true. And it was. The male wandered into the area, having no idea of the danger it was in. The T-Rex had just entered a zone full of carbon monoxide seeping out of the ground. Luckily, its head was just above the worst zone. However, it was still feeling the dizzying effects. The T-Rex stumbled around, shaking its large head. If it toppled over now, it would never get up. Luckily, it was barely able to fight the effects, bending down to pick up one of the bodies and leave the zone, still feeling dizzy. It ate its full, then realized the rest of the animal was going to be useful. It picked it up with its mouth, beginning to bring it over to the female, who was still crying on her cliff ledge, desperate for a male. However, just because one had turned up, that didn't mean she was going to just accept him. She wanted only the best. Luckily, the male bought her a gift of food, so she happily took it. And that night, nature occurred. Meanwhile, above the new burning star descending upon them was only just getting larger, until one fateful day, the new star looked almost like another smaller moon in the night sky, and could even be seen clearly in the day. Many of the smaller creatures, such as the Zerm and others, had looked up to the sky and was smart enough to know what would come next. The dinosaurs weren't quite smart enough to see it was getting bigger and brighter because it was coming closer. Creatures like the Zerm had the ability to know that. They quickly hid under the ground in preparation. Even if the dinosaurs could tell what was about to happen, it would be impossible for them to prepare because they were simply too big. And it was just too late for them. The dinosaurs weren't worried because they didn't realize what was going on, so in their mind, what was there to worry about? For them, life was just continuing like nothing was wrong. One day, one of the Zerm that hadn't yet descended into the cave yet came across a large cave and a huge pile of sticks and rocks. The Zerm jumped up onto the structure, very curious what it was, not realizing how much danger it was in. Before it could explore very far, the T-Rex rounded the corner from the other side, chomping its enormous jaws on the body of the Zerm, swallowing it whole. It then returned to its spot, waiting for its eggs to hatch. It hadn't had a meal in a few weeks because it wanted to protect its eggs. Luckily, it was able to feed on the occasional scavenger. The T-Rex shook its large head, then looked towards the sky, seeing more meteor showers. A few weeks later, even nature was beginning to realize the inevitable. All animals, even the dinosaurs, knew something was happening. Many had changed their various behaviors.
The T-Rex was walking through the forest when it looked to the enormous white ball in the sky, and even it was worried and knew something was deeply wrong. However, what could it possibly do? When it arrived at its cave, it heard the calls of its 3 children, jumping and whimpering, very hungry. The mother opened her mouth, dropping the food she had been holding in her mouth to the ground. They started eating and fighting each other for the food, making the T-Rex mother roar at them laying down.
For a few more hours, the illusion of continuity was upheld by the dinosaurs. That night, everything laid down to go to sleep like normal, unknowing of the horror that was going to fall upon them the very next day. For tonight was the last night of the dinosaurs. The mother T-Rex watched as her babies fell asleep, having no idea it would be the last time. The next morning, the dinosaurs awoke and were about to do their usual routines when they all noticed one by one that the object looming over them was far, far bigger than before, even bigger than the sun. It could almost be seen by everything and everyone, everywhere. This was the point where dinosaurs started to realize that seeing a second sun in the sky heading towards them was not a positive thing. Many dinosaurs had realized where the impact point was going to be, being near the coast of Yucatan Peninsula, getting faster and faster, heading directly towards the ground.
Many of the dinosaurs that lived in that area looked up at the sky as a dark, deep shadow slowly covered the ground, shutting them into darkness as the large meteor finally began to enter the atmosphere, coming closer and closer to the ground. It took the meteor only 4 seconds to pass through the thin layer between space and the atmosphere to make contact, piercing through the atmosphere like a dart being thrown onto the world's largest dartboard. And there was no stopping it from hitting the bullseye now. The moment it got through the atmosphere, it allowed the dinosaurs a warning of what was to come, so the dinosaurs could say goodbye to their world. It sent out an enormously loud shockwave, so powerful it blasted trees over, and even sent clouds and small rocks flying in all directions. The shock could be heard all over the world, like an alarm had gone off, waking every dinosaur in the world, all being informed that their time to be alive had expired. And it hadn't even hit the ground yet.
However, there was no time for the dinosaurs to wonder what the sound was, because it was already about to hit the ground. The meteor was going almost 60 times the speed of sound. The unnamed meteor, about to commit specicide on the biggest scale that would ever be recorded in the history of Zarlum, was larger than Mount Everest. It reached from the ocean high into the atmosphere. The T-Rex suddenly awoke from its children's panicked scream. She lifted her head, looking towards the destruction, watching as in a fraction of a moment, the world would be fundamentally different, and there was nothing she could do about it. She did try to protect her children by hiding them deeper into the cave. However, she knew there was nothing she could do for herself. But in her last moment, she knew it was her duty to protect her children. The mother stood watching the sky turn a stunning and horrifying shade of orange as it got brighter and brighter. It closed its eyes, preparing herself, as she knew her kingdom and her world was about to be ripped from her like a child's toy. Many of the dinosaurs that hadn't accepted death were terrified, trying to run away. However, there was nowhere they could run that would be anywhere near safe. But that didn't mean they couldn't try. However, the T-Rex wasn't going to run. She was like a captain who was going to go down with the ship. She also had a job that was breaking her heart. She had moved a rock in front of her children, and they were desperate to get to her, so she was holding the rock in place with her body to make sure they wouldn't get out and would hopefully survive. And she did so in the knowledge it would be the last thing she would ever do. And yet she physically couldn't stop herself from doing so. As the asteroid smashed into the shallow ocean, in less than a nanosecond, it decimated the thick bedrock below,
Before the asteroid fully impacted the ground, it released the energy of billions of nuclear weapons all at once, as the asteroid implanted itself into the ground, vaporizing the ground around it in under a second. That caused an enormous shock wave to envelop the entire planet, spreading out fast, blowing the once mighty trees completely flat. The explosion caused by the asteroid began to expand outwards, vaporizing millions of dinosaurs to pure dust. The sound of the meteor impacting the ground could be heard throughout the entire planet, instantly shooting fear into the hearts of the dinosaurs. A white flash of light illuminated the sky as an eerie white sphere glowed just over the Gulf of Mexico.
The T-Rex closed its eyes, bowing its head as the white light got closer and closer. Then it saw nothing. Bedrock melted into seething hot plasma at tens of thousands of degrees Celsius. The thermal radiation from the explosion traveled at the speed of light and started immediately burning everything within a radius of about 3,000 kilometers. While the energy from the impact pushed so hard against the crust of Zarlum that it lost all strength and flowed away from the impact site like a liquid, creating a hole 25 kilometers deep and 100 kilometers wide. And that was just in the starting few seconds of the horrific carnage. It was only going to get a lot worse than that, and it had already killed millions of dinosaurs in under a minute. So it truly was just completely an unstoppable wave of destructive power. The ocean was easily pushed back like nothing for hundreds of kilometers, like when a kid jumps into a puddle. As the crust bounced back on itself, it melted, and the flowing crust formed a temporary mountain stretching almost 10 kilometers into the sky. As an incredible amount of material was blasted into the higher atmosphere, or even out into space, as much as 60 times the original mass of the asteroid itself, went back to where it came from, like its job was done. The violence of the strike was felt everywhere on Zarlum within 30 seconds, and had the power to strike fear into everything around. 35 seconds after the initial impact, a magnitude Zarlum quake was caused from the chain reaction echoing back up. It was the single largest quake any living creature on Zarlum had ever witnessed in billions of years, and would ever be witnessed again. It was so insanely powerful, it covered the entire planet, sending ripples of mini-quakes, which echoed off each other over and over again, resulting in an enormous amount of tsunamis to begin invading the mainland.
The quakes were also affecting the world underneath the crust. The gases under the planet began to react violently with the newly weakened crust, resulting in almost every volcano in the world all going off at once, making the world even worse, sending enormous pools of lava and ash to rain down on the world from everywhere. But nowhere was as bad as the initial impact spot. The ground around Zarlum began to freely move, causing even more quakes to hit. It was a simple fact that no one would sleep through that day. Everything was woken up as their world came to an end. The gigantic explosions crashed against the atmosphere with an unprecedented amount of violence. It caused another shockwave that reached speeds of more than 1,000 kilometers per hour, destroying everything in their path.
About 2 minutes after the initial impact, the area around the initial impact site had become the world's first and last hyper-hurricane of ash and destruction. Basically, any vegetation or animal was completely shredded into pieces and catapulted thousands of kilometers away in an enormous wave, getting bigger and bigger, tearing up more and more ground. The formerly displaced oceans quickly returned as the temporary mountain at the site of the impact completely collapsed, being melted away. An enormous ring of powerful tsunamis as high as 1 kilometer, enough to cover all skyscrapers people would ever be able to build, head in all directions. As they crashed into the coast of the mainland sounding the impact site,
They would drown thousands of kilometers of coastlines.
About 15 hours after the impact, the world was still a horribly broken place, and it was still going to get worse. Some of the massive ocean's waves that got refracted around the south of the mainland would still tower as much as 100 meters into the sky, still assaulting the land. However, that wasn't the worst thing yet. That was practically a minor inconvenience compared to what was coming. A lot of debris thrown into space decided that it didn't really want to be up there anymore and would rather be back where it belonged. So it would either orbit the planet for a number of years to then plummet back down again thousands of years later, or it would join into the rings of the world, a few smashed into the 4 moons. However, about 65% of them just went right back down into the planet below. Most wouldn't actually touch the planet, however. That was actually the problem for the animals and dinosaurs below.
When things fell through the atmosphere at such speeds, they got intensely superheated, which usually wouldn't be a problem if it was just one. However, there were millions upon millions of tons of rocks, all superheating the planet at the same time, to disastrous effects everywhere. The entire world began to rapidly heat up, the atmosphere to insane, unimaginable temperatures. The air became as hot as the inside of an industrial oven. How badly the global effects of that were contested by future scientists of Zarlum. However, if enough heat reached the surface, a lot of plants and animals would have perished extremely quickly if they couldn't bury themselves underground or escape into caves away from all the carnage raining down on their world. The bits of debris above didn't just superheat in the atmosphere. A lot of the bigger pieces managed to break through and plummet down to the surface across the world, sparking enormous wildfires to ignite as Zarlum rotated under the searing hot plume. And it was only going to get worse from there, if that's even possible. The dinosaurs that ruled over the world was over now. They were just being relentlessly tortured. There was no escape, no hope, and absolutely no chance of survival.
24 hours after the initial impact, the massive wildfires burned around the entire globe. Some of them may have lasted for months or even years and turned Zarlum into a horrifying, burning, hellish version of its former self. The tsunamis were spreading around the globe. Nothing could stop them, although the heat was helping to slow them down. But that would only bring more bad. The volcanoes were spreading ash across the world like a virus, infecting every piece of land they were even, taking over the oceans, so nowhere was safe. As the day of the initial colossal impact finally came to an end, many of the dinosaurs had already died out from the carnage. However, just because the day had ended did not mean the destruction had come to an end. It was only going to get worse. The destruction is never going to stop getting worse around this period.
The gigantic plume of vaporized material and the ash from the volcanoes reached the upper atmosphere and began to be stitched together like a huge blanket around the world of pure darkness. Together with the soot from the burned planet generated at the impact, the planet sunk into a deep darkness, with only a few remaining fires illuminating the scenery. Whatever plant life managed to survive the fires, storms, tsunamis, volcanoes, and mass amount of heat would have been starved for sunlight, as the global supply of photosynthesis was temporarily shut down. Within days, the temperature would have plummeted as much as 25 degrees Celsius, making survival near impossible for the small amount of dinosaurs that somehow managed to survive there. Weren't many, and there wasn't much they could do to survive the nuclear winter. The oceans would have been especially hit hard. The lack of sunlight would have killed over 90% of the plankton, which formed the basis of the food of marine life. Ultimately, that would kill off the large marine reptiles and ammonites that used to dominate the seas for almost 265 million years.
The biosphere of the survivors would find themselves in an alien landscape. Ash, debris, and the burned remains of the formerly lush and blooming life covered the ground. The sky would have been dark, and it would have been freezing, and fresh food had been scarce, while the fungi would have thrived beautifully, expanding across Zarlum.
Inside that dark, horrible world was the calling of two small creatures. They finally managed to push the rock aside. Their mother was gone. They didn't even have a body to bury. They looked into the cave, seeing their sister sadly had not survived, but they had no time to mourn her. They had to find food, and that wouldn't be as easy as they would hope. They stumbled out their cave, shivering from the cold. They wandered for miles, getting weaker and weaker, until they finally found a very sad sight. A former pterosaur laying on the ground. Still alive, however, its wings and a lot of its body had been horribly burned away. It was desperately trying to move, however, it was clearly and very quickly dying. The baby T-Rexes started picking at its flesh, eventually killing it. However, this wasn't as much of a victory as you'd expect. They died a few hours later, huddled together for warmth. They were just too weak to survive this harsh, horrible new world. The nuclear winter lasted years. During that time, the planet would have been an extremely hostile and deadly place to live on, with almost everything against the things living there. The sudden global winter would have lasted for decades. At least 75% of all species on the planet would have just vanished from existence, like God had just flipped a switch, because he kind of did. The transformation from a beautiful world to a hellish one happened in under a month. Nature can change unnervingly quickly at times. The continuity that once went on for millions of years had been completely shattered, like throwing a stone at a window.
The era of the dinosaurs was over. Only a few were still alive. Some dying vegetation was still around, so small dinosaurs were running around the steaming ground, ate from it. However, many herbivores got so desperate for food they ate each other. Because they had to. The dinosaurs didn't have to look around anymore, because the hunters were also dead. And so life moved on like that for a few horrible months, until God had to look down on the reality of what had been done. One of the dinosaurs that had been eating the vegetation had finally ran out. As it searched for more, its legs sadly gave out as it fell to the ground. It could barely move, pulling itself along with its arms, desperately trying to do anything it could for survival. However, gave up as its arms and legs lost all the muscle, and it almost looked like a skeleton with skin because it had become so thin. All it could do was moan and cry out in pain, as one of the last surviving dinosaur that had been through so much horror and destruction finally died, ending its horrific suffering and closing the world in darkness and silence for a very long time.
And with that, the legacy of the kings that once dominated the planet for 275 million years was reduced to nothing but a panicked, suffering creature. It was shocking how quickly their world ended. It didn't matter about the millions of years beforehand because it had ended in a few months. If that doesn't make your knees feel a little weak, I don't know what will. The dinosaurs are a good example that it doesn't matter how long you rule a place, the wheel just keeps turning. And now the wheel was turning towards a new form of life that had been hiding for years. Finally, the nuclear winter finally ended. The sun was finally able to touch the planet's surface again, and it was a welcome relief, melting all the ice that had appeared. The vegetation that once overtook the planet began to take it back again, unperturbed by the minor setback of the former destruction. It was helped massively by the new fungus that had been slowly overtaking the world, that helped to bring the vegetation back, and the world was back to something similar to how it was before. However, the question had to be asked, now the dinosaurs were dead and buried. Who would take over?
The throne was open for anything to come and take it. But who would be anywhere near strong or powerful enough to stand tall and rule over the world? It almost looked like nothing else was left alive to take over the new world. But amazingly, from the ashes of the old world, survivors slowly emerged.
End of Episode 2, Part 2.